And we're back on the airwaves.
Yeah. So now we're gonna talk a little bit about this education is a right debate that was on the MUN Debate Society hosted last week.
I was a little bit distracted because I wanted to actually go to attend it on the Wednesday evening, but it was right scheduled during our MUNSU residence tours, so we couldn't make it out.
And I had to work, so I also couldn't make it out.
Well, what we'd like to do, we have James Doyle here. He was the moderator of the debate. And what we're going to ask basically from you, James, is we weren't there, so we don't really have the full experience of what it was. But could you explain to us kind of the atmosphere, the setting, the context of it all?
Well, the atmosphere was positively vitriolic, which is exactly what we wanted. There were people shouting at each other, though debaters and audience, not debaters at debaters, which is, that's unacceptable. I'm shaking my finger now. Yeah, it was actually quite evenly packed, as you can read in the Muse, one of the only accurate things in that piece. There were probably equal parts in favor, equal parts not, at least at the start, and we had some very angry spectators from either side who had very well-researched questions, a couple which caught the debaters off guard, caused them to quip some things that probably can't be said on air. Some other things that shouldn't be said on air. But it was a very fun debate. The audience really got into it, which is something we always want. I know in the also in the Muse article, apparently they got unacceptably enthusiastic, which I think is just acceptable enough.
What exactly does that mean? Because I feel like that was a certain way to word it that doesn't make it sound as bad as it necessarily was.
No, I think that's a certain way to word it to make it... unfortunately, to make it seem like it's worse than it was. There were comments flying back and forth between certain spectators and a certain couple of debaters. They were mostly in good fun. Some of them weren't, which was even more fun. At one point, it does say that, yes, after someone heckled the opposition, so that's education is not a right, it caused one of the debaters to quip, I can't hear your question over the drum circle, at which point I shut that exchange down, because that was rather nasty.
So, sorry, James, just to take one step back, can you explain the difference between a general kind of public debate versus what you would typically do in just the general practice of debating? Because it is different, is it not?
Yeah, it's much different, and that difference comes from two things. One is that we're playing to a crowd, obviously with the public debate, and the other debates are just to debaters. The other one is the difference in sort of knowledge of mechanics of debate. So when we debate every sort of Tuesdays and Thursdays around 6, we have a very certain structure. People have certain speaking times, and it's back, forth, back, forth, back, forth, and then it's done. But when you want to engage the audience, and when you have people who aren't familiar with the style of the format, rather, of debate, we like to open it up more to the floor. So there were only 3-minute opening statements from each debater and 3-minute closing statements, and the rest was all audience questions. I didn't even get to use my own questions. There were that many from the audience. It wasn't bad in that regard. I didn't have to do any work, because I certainly didn't prepare.
No, that's good that the audience. It's good that the audience was so engaged. So the final, I read in the Muse article, the vote at the end by the audience was against, right? It was education is not a right, or to deny the motion.
I noted that one actually when I read it, because it took me aback a bit, because we did 2 votes. In public debates, we like to sort of ask people either where they stood before or where they stood after, or we do which side do you side with and which side do you think presented their case better. And I note this says a substantial number voted to fail the motion, but it was actually 11-8. So it was 11 people against, 8 people for. So 2 votes either way would have made the result different. But interestingly enough, and this probably marked the sign of a good debate, is that the tally for who presented their case better was actually 9-7 for government. That is, education is a right. Not everyone voted on everything, of course. We made people raise hands. We didn't give them the pleasure of a secret ballot.
Right.
So that may explain why some people didn't vote. But yeah, it was quite balanced. So 11-8, 9-7. It's not exactly as substantial as it's portrayed in the article.
So the idea of education as a right, it kind of seems like it was provoked by a particular campaign that we're all familiar with around campus.
Oh, really?
So
did
Did you find that the debate centralized around like student action through the CFS, or was it maybe a broader, more kind of general approach to the notion of education being a right, regardless of, like, was CFS brought up?
Well, actually, no. CFS was brought up before the debate, of course, when we invited the president of CFSNL and the director external for MUN to come and speak in favor of the motion. They both declined due to time commitments.
Allegedly.
Yes, allegedly. And I'm not privy to those emails, though I wish I was. Actually, I think I am. But then we asked some other prominent student politicians. Unfortunately, as the election season was around, and of course that's why we held the debate when we did, they also refrained due to time commitments. And I noted, as Max did before, there was a residence tour scheduled at the exact same time. I don't know how early that was scheduled. That probably killed our turnout by a little bit, though we did have a packed room. With the debate itself, though, CFS was not mentioned even once. There was no mention of the CFS, partly due to the CFS not actually being in the debate, so it was just two debaters for and two debaters against, rather than activists from either side. And no, it focused on the general idea of whether education should be free or not. I think the debaters decided that they wouldn't get into the muddy idea too much of what ought to be a right and what ought not to be a right, and decided to focus on the costs and the benefits of having free education. And I think that that made it a bit of a better debate than it would have been.
So would you be able to, by doing justice to the debaters, give us the kind of compelling sides of each one?
Yeah,
and maybe even the weaknesses of.
Oh, I could definitely do that.
Of each one.
Okay.
Being a debater
that's
myself.
Definitely a little more interesting. So give us the weaknesses.
I'll start with just vaguely what they each said to be a bit fair before. So the first speaker was Russell Cochrane, and he got up for his side, education is a right, and decided to talk about how access to education enables a lot of people to get into the workforce that wouldn't be able to before, especially when they came from poorer backgrounds, and talked about how even though student loans are a good solution, they're not what he thinks is the best solution, because they do have, at least in Newfoundland, the federal portion of interest is still there, and other things like that. And then I believe, yeah, okay, I was looking at the article for the order of debaters, and that's just not the case. So then opposition got up, Michael Sullivan, and talked about how with the current bureaucracy, it wouldn't financially be feasible to provide free education. And this is what, of course, a lot of the audience members who were in favor of that side of the motion premised their questions on. And he argued that there would have to be more cuts to other departments because there doesn't seem to be a large stream of revenue coming in that could offset it. Taylor Stocks then talked about how society as a whole is benefited by education. When people learn, say, he used the example of the liberal arts education. People learn to combat things like racism and sexism and things like this, and that when people are educated, it helps. Then David Speed, of course, got up and, in his usual aggressive manner.
David's a bit hardline, I can tell from the article.
Yeah, David is one of the most, he used to be one of the most aggressive debaters in debate. He got repeatedly given the comment that he should probably calm down. He is literally scaring people away, though he's a lovely guy. He's calmed down a bit, but for the public debate, I think he just got back into his usual format, and it was extremely fun. He talked a lot about useless folklore degrees.
That's my favorite argument against. That's pretty much my exact quote when I'm making the argument against education.
Of course, he once the audience didn't like him calling out folklore degrees, he changed it to useless anthropology degrees, and Russell got back at him there and talked about how there's no anthropology factory, but there are certain benefits of it.
Well, yeah, that's interesting. So what were giving us basically the brief kind of idea of where people are going with it? What were the weak sides of each argument?
The weak side of each argument.
Maybe not of each argument, but of the.
Oh yeah, of the round as a whole. Okay. because the format really allowed for weakness, I would say. When you have sustained attacks from the audience, and you only have 3 minutes of completely your own time, each at the first and the last of the debate, you don't get to bring up as much information or as much argumentation as you would in a regular Tuesday or Thursday meeting. So the weak points were probably, if I can remember, well, side government didn't focus on the financial aspect that much. So they did provide a very compelling case about why for people of disadvantaged backgrounds, free education would be just irreconcilably good. And they talked about how it sort of improves the idea, the collective ideas of society, and how they would, the access to education would enable people to be able to think more about the world around them and come to different conclusions. But they didn't really get into the argument that you see in a lot of CFS campaign material, that it's somehow economically beneficial to have
return on investment.
Yeah. Exactly. Those are on all the posters. And I thought that particularly strange, because with all that material lying around the school, that they didn't bring up the argument at all, raises one of two questions. One, they had limited time. They maybe just wanted to focus on the stuff that they were more familiar with. Or two, that they didn't think that argument from the campaign is that strong at all. So that's where side government was weakest. And side opposition was probably weakest in not really addressing the social matters brought up by side government. So they talked a lot about how the financing of this just wouldn't work, and treating education as an investment is a good way to get people who are committed to doing education into their fields. But they didn't really talk too much, except to make fun of folklore and anthropology degrees to get back at the at side government's social claims. So those were the weak points, but there was a lot of other areas of clash, and they did get into it a bit with the audience that I allowed, and I don't regret that. There was quite a bit of things that we can't say on the radio.
That's really it. So it was good, though. Do you think that it was overall very well?
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm going to ask you to do at the very end of this is obviously do a little plug for the debate club, the debate society.
I will shamelessly plug it.
And you can talk to us about everything that you've done in the past and what you intend to do and stuff like that. But what would you be? How would you pick the next public debate, and how? And
what topics might you
when
like
would
to
you
see in the next public debate?
Next public debates. So I know MUN Debate has done Education as a Right before, and we decided to do it again. Maybe just have a spice up election season a little bit. We thought we'd get some student politician debaters, but unfortunately that didn't happen. We've done the secular charter debate in the fall semester, and that was about, of course, the legislation brought forward in Quebec about restricting religious liberties while working as a public servant. And I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly what we're going to do next, but I probably would be able to tell you if we were going to have a public debate again at the end of this semester, though, of course, with final exams coming up, that's a bit difficult. Though next year we'll probably be doing them on a more regular basis, probably around one every 1 or 2 months. We didn't get to do that this time around because we actually had a lot of debaters. I was one of them who were away in Harlow, and the sort of staffing just wasn't there to do a lot. Do you have any ideas on public debate topics? Because I could write them down.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, I'm wondering, so is it my understanding that this most recent Education is a Right debate, is that going to be available to listen to or watch? Or?
Yeah, no, Jamie Brace videotaped the entire event. Of course, one of the promoters, the Atlantic Institute for Market Studies, was going to put it up on their website. I think both myself with my comments before the debate and Russell with his excessive swearing pretty much stopped that from happening. So it won't be up on Ames's site, but we are working on sort of splicing it together, cutting out the dead bits, and we're going to put it up on the MUN Debate website once we get it all finished. Yeah,
that's great. So could you tell us a little more about MUN Debate before we part ways here?
Oh, sure. I don't talk about MUN Debate at all. I don't know what to say. Other than that, We meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 6 p.m. and sometimes on Sundays at 3. But what MUN Debate does is a little bit of everything. We talk about current issues. We analyze things like we would possibly in research papers at school, and we have a liberal amount of off-color jokes and drinking as well. In fact, a slogan is often MUN Debate, 2 drink minimum. We always go down to Big Ben's pub afterwards. When you come to debate, it may seem intimidating at the start, especially so with some previous debaters we had when I was getting into it. But we're generally a friendly bunch. We won't make you do anything if you don't want to. You can just sit down and watch your first couple of times. Usually someone stands up, speaks for 7 minutes, someone else stands up, speaks for 7 minutes, someone else stands up, speaks for 7 minutes, someone else stands up, speaks for 10 minutes, and then someone else stands up and speaks for 3 minutes, and then we go to the pub. So it's not too complicated.
Doesn't sound too bad.
Yeah. If anyone's listening, consider popping down on Tuesday, where we'll also have our elections for next year's executive.
Where is it that you guys meet?
Thank you for asking me that question, because I completely forgot it. It's in the Science Building. It's room 2105, which when you walk into the Science Building from the courtyard area, it's down the hall on the right, and it's the first door on the right.
That's perfect.
Excellent.
Well, thank you. So we have one more thing we were going to talk about before we go to our 11:30 break, but we thank you for coming on, James.
Oh, thanks very much.
Excellent. I'm glad we ran into you tonight.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
I was shamelessly hanging out in the MUN Debate room, where it's very nice to sleep sometimes.
You were comfy on the couch, for sure.
That's great. Well, thank you very much for coming on, James, and we'll make